today holds a significance far beyond what you might immediately perceive. Beneath the surface, something profound has been steadily and quietly gathering momentum. And if you truly reflect, this entire month commenced with an unusual intensity, marked by undeniable pressure and dynamic movement. Indeed, the very beginning of this month brought with it a series of potent, spiritually resonant events. Their full impact wasn't meant to be absorbed instantaneously, which is precisely why your experience of them might have felt fragmented or diffuse. Yet, today marks the pivotal point where all these disparate threads converge and find their focal landing. Nothing that has transpired recently was an isolated incident. It merely appeared that way as you encountered each piece individually. But step back now, and the overarching pattern reveals itself with striking clarity. One significant event unfolded, then another, each subtly escalating in intensity from the last. We've observed a recent surge in solar activity and prominent flares, alongside subtle yet perceptible earthquakes, authentic shifts within the very fabric of the Earth. Moreover, the profound influence of the recent pink moon has yet to fully dissipate. None of these occurrences stood alone. And now, you find yourself at the very nexus where all these seemingly separate phenomena seamlessly connect. This crucial connection is precisely what many people overlook. They tend to await one grand, obvious sign, failing to grasp that the authentic signal resides within the pattern itself, the cumulative build-up that served as the true message. Moments of such pronounced convergence don't simply happen by chance. They arise when a significant preparation is underway, when a fundamental shift in direction is imminent, yet unfolds without a loud public declaration. And today isn't merely another segment within that unfolding sequence. It is the critical juncture where the current phase transforms into something entirely new. However, if you're inclined to believe this is solely about external occurrences, you're already misplacing your focus. If you've been feeling slightly off lately, not in a dramatic fashion, but in a way you can't quite articulate, rest assured you are not imagining it. This isn't just a myriad of things happening, this is everything happening simultaneously. And certain individuals are acutely picking up the full, immersive weight of it all. When multiple intense moments stack themselves within the same compressed time frame, the experience rarely feels clear. Instead, it often manifests as overwhelming, akin to your entire system, attempting to process an excess of signals at once. This explains why previously simple tasks suddenly feel more arduous than they should. Decisions that once required mere seconds now carry a strange, heavy import. Time itself feels distorted, rushing uncontrollably in one moment, then dragging interminably in the next. Even familiar environments can feel subtly alien, as if you no longer quite fit into them in the same way. And the most frustrating aspect? You often can't fully articulate why you feel this way. But this isn't confusion in a detrimental sense, it is heightened sensitivity. Overwhelm, in this context, is simply what clarity feels like before it has had the chance to fully organize itself into coherent understanding. The truth is, nothing is inherently wrong with you. You're not falling behind, you're not losing control. You are simply experiencing and processing more than most people are, either willing or able to. And those who seemingly feel nothing, they aren't necessarily more grounded. They're simply not yet tuned in to the full, comprehensive signal. Earlier this week, an event occurred that most people casually dismissed as merely another full moon. But that particular celestial moment was far more than something to merely observe. It was a potent signpost pointing forward. That specific moon has historically carried a quiet yet profound meaning. Long before anyone attempted to scientifically explain it, humanity instinctively sensed what it heralded. It was never truly about the moon itself, but rather about what inevitably followed in its wake. This was the precise point where everything begins to turn, where the phase of waiting starts to draw to a close, where something that has been silently building finally reaches the surface. The signal invariably precedes the shift, never follows it. That moon was the unmistakable signal, and today is the direct response to it. Not in a loud, obvious display, but in a way that subtly yet decisively alters direction without demanding overt attention. Something that was previously paused is now unequivocally in motion. Something that was merely forming is no longer just forming. It is here. And if you didn't perceive the signal when it first emerged, you might entirely miss what has just been set into motion. Right now, many individuals are experiencing a powerful urge to regain control over their lives, to meticulously organize things, make definitive decisions, and bring everything back into a semblance of balance, expecting to feel stable and clear once more. However, that very instinct is precisely where people often err. This particular moment is not a balanced, and it is not intended to be. When everything compresses into such a short, intense period, things naturally feel uneven, unpredictable, and slightly out of place. This isn't a problem that needs fixing, it's a fundamental condition to be understood. The mistake lies in attempting to smooth things out too quickly, in trying to force clarity where a profound movement is still occurring beneath the surface. People rush to label what they're feeling, to resolve it, to get back on track, without realizing that the very track itself is shifting beneath their feet. There are profound moments where confusion isn't a sign of being lost. It's a clear indicator that things are rearranging themselves faster than your conscious mind can interpret them. If you attempt to stabilize everything right now, you risk interrupting a natural, vital process that is still actively unfolding. Not everything that feels off needs immediate correction. Some things feel off simply because they're in the midst of fundamentally changing shape. And if you interfere too early, you risk missing what they were truly becoming. When people contemplate Easter, their minds typically leap directly to the idea of resurrection, of things coming back to life, of renewal and new beginnings. But they often bypass the crucial phase that actually imbues that moment with its profound meaning. Resurrection can only occur because something first reached a complete and total end. There is always a preceding phase before the turning point, a time when everything appears finished, when nothing seems to be moving, when it feels as though whatever you were expecting is no longer destined to happen. That specific part of the story is inherently uncomfortable, which is why people often ignore it. Yet, it is arguably the most vital part. What has been unfolding over the past weeks carries this identical pattern. There has been an undeniable pressure, an intensity, a pervasive build-up, but also an accompanying sense that things weren't fully resolving, almost as if something was stuck in place without clear direction. This is not failure. This is precisely the phase that immediately precedes the fundamental shift. You don't recognize the turning point while you are still enveloped in the dark. You only realize it wasn't the turning point after the light has unequivocally returned. And that, precisely, is what distinguishes today. It is not merely another continuation of what has been happening. It is the precise point where that stalled, unclear phase begins to move in an entirely new direction. Therefore, the truly pertinent question isn't solely about what's occurring externally. It's about what aspects of your own life have felt like they reached an absolute end, like they halted, like they were no longer progressing anywhere. Because this is precisely the kind of moment where those particular narratives don't remain static, they are poised for a profound transformation. There is a very specific, yet largely unrecognized shift happening right now in how people experience time itself. It's subtle, but once you consciously notice it, it becomes impossible to ignore. Waiting simply doesn't feel the same anymore. For a long time, waiting often felt like a form of control, taking your time, holding off, staying in place until things made more sense. That used to feel safe, like you were being judicious, like you were wisely avoiding potential mistakes. There was a genuine comfort in not rushing, in simply observing, in remaining where things felt predictable. But now, that very same act of waiting feels fundamentally different. It feels heavy. It feels as though you are actively holding something in place that inherently no longer wishes to remain there, as if you are deliberately delaying something that is already trying to surge forward on its own accord. And that is precisely what generates this strange internal tension. It isn't anxiety in the usual sense, it's not outright panic, nor is it merely external pressure. It's something far more direct than any of those. It manifests as a quiet yet insistent push, as if something deep within you has already made a decision before your conscious mind has had sufficient time to fully process it. That's why hesitation now feels inherently uncomfortable, because it is no longer a neutral state. Hesitation only feels safe and appropriate when nothing else is actively moving. Once movement commences, it invariably begins to feel like direct resistance. You can readily observe this profound shift in how people are now interacting and acting. Decisions that once routinely took weeks are now being made within a matter of days. Situations or behaviors that individuals tolerated for years are suddenly being questioned with an unprecedented urgency. Conversations are becoming notably more direct, less filtered, and decidedly less patient. Even the fundamental way people think is shifting. There's less overanalysis, less unproductive circling, less perceived need to meticulously justify every single step before taking it. For some, this rapid acceleration feels deeply unsettling, because they are accustomed to taking their time, to patiently waiting for the perfect moment, the ideal clarity, or the definitive sign before making a move. But this is simply not how this particular moment operates. This kind of pivotal moment doesn't wait for you to feel ready, it moves first, and then you are compelled to catch up to its pace. That's precisely why attempting to revert to how things felt before simply doesn't work anymore. You might try to slow down, to pause, to remain exactly where you are, but it feels forced, unnatural. It feels as if you're trying to stand completely still on a surface that is already unequivocally in motion. And that creates this distinct discomfort, not because something is inherently wrong, but because something has already definitively started. There is a precise point where waiting ceases to be genuine patience and begins to transform into active avoidance. And many people are standing right at that critical juncture now. They can instinctively feel that remaining where they are no longer feels right, but they don't yet fully grasp why. So, they attempt to rationalize it, to explain it away, to convince themselves that nothing has truly changed. But something profoundly has changed. The internal shift has already occurred. And once that happens, everything else inevitably begins to follow suit. Your actions, your decisions, your priorities, and even your tolerance for certain situations. It all starts to realign with that foundational internal shift. That's why things feel faster, more direct, more immediate. Not because time itself has physically altered, but because your fundamental relationship to it has. And once that relationship changes, you no longer move in the same way, you no longer wait in the same way, you no longer think in the same way, and you no longer delay in the same way. You begin to move with something, instead of perpetually against it. Most people navigate their entire lives without ever truly pausing to consider the sun. It's simply always there, a constant presence in the background, reliably performing its duties, rising, setting, maintaining a predictable order. It's something people implicitly trust to remain consistent, which is precisely why it becomes significant when that consistency no longer feels absolute. Because, whether people consciously realize it or not, everything here on Earth is intimately tied to it. Before the advent of complex systems, before scientific explanations, before anything was precisely measured or definitively labeled, life itself inherently followed the sun. Not merely in obvious ways like the progression of day and night, but in far deeper rhythms, growth cycles, behavioral patterns, precise timing, and even the inexplicable ways people felt without being able to articulate why. The sun sets the fundamental baseline. So when that baseline shifts, even subtly, its effects don't remain isolated. It sends ripples throughout everything that depends upon it, which fundamentally is everything. And recently, the sun has been anything but quiet. It has been remarkably active in a way that truly stands out, even if most people don't fully comprehend what they're observing. There's been a noticeable increase in its intensity, its movement, and an inherent unpredictability. This isn't about fostering fear, nor is it about attempting to explain it purely scientifically. It's about recognizing an ancient pattern that has always existed. When the sun becomes more intense, conditions here on Earth do not remain the same. This isn't because it directly causes specific events, but rather because it effectively raises the energetic level of everything that is already present. It amplifies what is already subtly building beneath the surface. Consider how dramatically different everything feels when the environment shifts. When the light becomes stronger, when the ambient heat rises, when the overall conditions change, things that previously felt stable begin to behave in new, unexpected ways. That's precisely what is occurring now, just on a level that people don't always consciously perceive. The sun doesn't introduce change. Rather, it forces what was previously hidden to become unmistakably visible. And that, in essence, is why this moment feels the way it does for some individuals. Not overwhelming in an overtly dramatic sense, but more like everything is just slightly more intense than usual. Thoughts feel sharper, decisions feel more immediate. Things that were once easy to ignore now stand out effortlessly. It's as if the margin for comfortable avoidance has significantly diminished. You can observe this shift in how rapidly people are reacting to situations they once tolerated. How certain circumstances that felt perfectly manageable before suddenly feel unnecessary or entirely out of place. How there's noticeably less patience for things that don't feel intrinsically aligned, even if no dramatic external event has transpired. This isn't random. This is the natural consequence when the underlying conditions fundamentally shift. Intensity doesn't create pressure, it reveals where pressure already inherently exists. And for people who are more sensitive to these kinds of subtle shifts, this experience doesn't remain merely external. It becomes something deeply felt internally. Even if you cannot trace it back to a specific identifiable cause, it manifests as a profound sense that things are simultaneously speeding up and becoming more real, as if there's less and less distance between what you feel and what you are compelled to confront. When you take a step back and cease viewing each event in isolation, something far more intriguing begins to emerge. It's not just that multiple things are happening concurrently, it's that they are all expressing the exact same fundamental pattern, simply through different energetic layers. What you are witnessing right now is the powerful release of accumulated pressure, manifesting everywhere at the same time. The sun builds up intensity and then releases it. The earth accumulates stress and then shifts its tectonic plates to release it. The moon reaches a point of energetic completion, where everything that was being pulled finally culminates and peaks. And the profound meaning historically tied to this particular moment in time has always revolved around something reaching its absolute limit, only to then transform into something entirely new. These aren't separate, disconnected ideas. They are facets of the same overarching process, repeating itself across various cosmic and personal levels. That's precisely what makes this moment so distinct. It's not just one layer of reality undergoing change while everything else remains stable. Instead, multiple interconnected layers are aligning around this very same movement. The electromagnetic, the physical, the cyclical, and the deeply symbolic are all expressing the same fundamental truth simultaneously. And that is a truly rare occurrence because usually shifts happen in isolation. One area changes, then another, and it takes time for everything to eventually catch up. But right now, it is all happening synchronously, which creates an entirely different kind of moment, a far more potent one. The most powerful and transformative shifts don't unfold in just one localized place. They manifest everywhere at once. That's why this no longer feels like a mere build-up. It feels like something is already irrevocably in motion, like something has already crossed a definitive point where it cannot possibly revert to its previous state. And this is where most people fundamentally misunderstand what they are observing. They believe all of this is merely pointing towards something that is about to happen, like a warning or a preview of future events. But that is not what this is at all. This is the demonstration itself. This is precisely what it looks like when accumulated pressure transforms into active, undeniable movement. When something of this magnitude is happening on a larger, cosmic scale, it doesn't remain separate from your personal life. It directly reflects into it, often in ways that feel deeply confusing if you don't recognize the underlying pattern. Because the same profound process that occurs in the earth when pressure builds and then releases also occurs within people. There are moments in life where things seem perfectly stable on the surface, but underneath, something significant has been building for a long, sustained period. Unspoken tension, dawning realizations, fundamental misalignments, questions that were never fully addressed. It doesn't always appear dramatic while it's unfolding. In fact, most of the time it looks completely normal until, suddenly, it doesn't. Until something truly shifts. And then, everything that once felt undeniably stable begins to radically rearrange itself. That, in essence, is what a personal shift actually looks like. Not a collapse, not a failure, but rather a necessary redistribution of pressure that was already inherently present. And this is where people often get it wrong. They experience that internal shift and immediately assume something is going terribly awry, that things are falling apart, that they've lost all control, that something is fundamentally breaking. But that is not what is happening at all. The very moment things truly begin to move is usually the moment people mistakenly believe they are falling apart. In reality, what is unfolding is much closer to what occurs within the Earth itself. A system that holds too much pressure for too long inevitably becomes unstable. But when that pressure begins to release in smaller, more continuous ways, it actually prevents something far more catastrophic from happening later on. So, the people actively navigating significant change right now, the ones grappling with difficult decisions, profound endings, unexpected redirections, things that feel profoundly uncertain or unfamiliar, they are not in a breakdown phase. They are, in fact, in a vital release phase. And those are two entirely different experiences. A breakdown halts everything. A release, even if it feels intensely uncomfortable while it's happening, invariably moves things forward. Now, connect that profound understanding back to what this current moment truly represents. And if you are still here, still absorbing these words, I genuinely appreciate that far more than you can imagine. There is so much unfolding right now, so many forces pulling people in disparate directions. And the very fact that you have remained attentive through all of this speaks volumes about where you are in this pivotal moment. Not everyone catches these kinds of windows of opportunity while they are actually open. If something within these words resonated with you, even in a small way, then you are already more attuned to what is truly happening than you might realize. You don't need to frantically chase this moment or try to force some immediate, definitive meaning out of it. Simply being acutely aware of it is profoundly enough. This isn't about having everything definitively figured out today. It's about recognizing, with a deep inner knowing, that you are precisely at a point where things are undeniably shifting, whether that shift is overtly obvious yet or not. Some moments don't demand immediate action. They simply ask for profound awareness. So, Whatever comes next for you, move forward with an intrinsic sense that things are opening, not closing. Even if it doesn't yet appear perfectly clear, even if it feels profoundly uncertain, it doesn't mean you're off track. You are simply in that vital part of the story where everything is beginning to profoundly change.